Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who, as you may know, has been running as an independent and got some pretty good interest in the very beginning. There were certain points where it looked like he might have been getting up as much as 20% of the vote. Um, he chose a running mate a little while ago, Nicole Shanahan. And she recently said in an interview that her campaign was considering dropping out of the race and endorsing former President Donald Trump. Now, for her to say this out loud means there's got to be something to this. Again, this isn't like an unsubstantiated rumor from some anonymous campaign source. This is his vice presidential candidate saying they're thinking about this. Um, and she says they really have to think about this, given that recent information is showing now that Kamala is the Democratic nominee, he's maybe dropped down to 5%. He's lost a lot of support, and the support he's getting is mostly being drawn from Donald Trump. Now, again, I want to talk about this from a Catholic perspective. What do we make of this? First of all, there's a lot of similarities between Donald Trump and Robert F. Kennedy Jr. They both are sort of approaching a run for the presidency as a quote outsider, not a Washington insider. They're running against the bureaucracy, the war machine, the constant foreign wars. So, in that sense, they're saying very, very similar things. They're against corruption in the government. They think the government has been hiding things, been doing nefarious things. They're against the three-letter agencies. Um, Again, so you may look at that and see, a decent amount of similarity. They're both what I've called Trump disruptors. I think the Washington elites that run this country, the oligarchy, are scared of both of them. So, in kind of your Roman history, they're kind of Caesar and Cassius, right? They're the people that were getting the patricians worried and worked up. They weren't exactly the same, but they sort of were seen as that kind of threat to the oligarchy. Um, Kennedy is different on a couple of key fronts. One front, he's at least somewhat, I think, consistent philosophically. He basically says, I'm a libertarian. And he's more or less consider, yeah, again, what a libertarian is a little vague sometimes, but he at least with the broad notion of a libertarian is pretty consistent. Trump is funny. It's really hard to say what he is, right? He's a Republican, but he turned the Republican Party into him. So he's not really a traditional Republican. He's not really a libertarian. It is really hard to kind of categorize him. He's really, in many sense, a sort of pragmatist, is I think the best way to philosophically put him forward. He's sort of for what works. Where I think Kennedy is a little bit more thoughtful in that sense, a little more philosophical. Now, there's problems with libertarianism. It's essentially classical liberalism, and that's a problem. Secondly, on the abortion issue, there definitely are differences. Again, although Trump has been disappointing on abortion of late, I think in a pandering to some voters he's not going to get anyway. Kennedy has, despite a little initial waffle, come out pretty clearly that he's in favor of no restraints on abortion up till birth. And so I think, notwithstanding the softness in the Trump campaign, Kennedy is worse on that issue. And he's worse for a second reason. And again, a lot of people laugh when I say this, they dismiss it. Um, Trump is not a Catholic. Right? He's not. We pray, hope he does. I hope he converts. His wife has been a good influence. She is Catholic, but he's not. And to whom much is given, much is expected. To whom less is given, you can give them a little bit more understanding. Again, you can't compromise our principles, but you can acknowledge, okay, he doesn't have the full truth. Kennedy was born, raised a traditional Catholic, right? He was raised in the 50s and 60s, in the 60s. Um, he he's had an interesting life. He had troubles. I think he's come back from some of his addictions and things. But he's definitely not a traditional Catholic, practicing traditional Catholic. He's some sort of vague deist, it seems like to me. So to him, much more was given. He's had the sacramental life of the church. He had the traditional church growing up. Um, and we should expect more of him. He should know better. as having been raised Catholic. So it's a difficult one. I mean, should you support him? Up until now, I've said Trump is certainly better. I think he's interesting. He's a disruptor. He's pointing out a lot of the same flaws that Trump is. So good. I think this is likely to happen. As I said, I think he's likely to step down because I think he realizes he's not going to succeed in this, and if he throws his support behind Trump, I think to be fair to him, he sees the corruption of the mainstream Democratic Party, what it's become. The Democratic Party of his father and uncle, it doesn't exist anymore. It is essentially a Marxist party, notwithstanding the Kennedy's flaws, John F. and Robert Kennedy. They were not Marxists. They had some problems, but I think he sees this party as nothing, and he sees the utter corruption of these people and does not want to get them in. And although he may not like everything Trump does, he sees that he's better than that alternative. So, and he sees maybe an opportunity to have an influence on government. I think the two issues he is really solid on are vaccines and the utter corruption in the FDA and the CDC, and all the agencies that are bought off by pharmaceutical money. And he's not a latecomer to that party. He has been fighting a good fight for decades, defending parents of children who have been injured in the uh, what if I were Eisenhower, I would call the medical industrial complex. And he has done really, really good work on that, raising awareness on those issues. Secondly, he's a real environmentalist in the way Catholics should be. Again, I always say this climate change, global warming, whatever they want to call it, is all a distraction. It is a distraction from real issues. I mean, we as Catholics who want to take care of our health, our bodies, we want water that isn't polluted. We want water that isn't, we want food that is not polluted with chemicals and cancer causing Roundup sprayed all over it. We are in favor of those real things that are actually real issues and are doing more harm to the American people. The American people are sicker than we've ever been in the history of this country, worse than 19th century, worse than any other country in the world. And he has done a lot to point out the corruption that has led to these environmental factors that do actually affect us, unlike the theoretical things that Greta Thunberg whines about. So I have to give him credit on that. Again, I think he is very consistent on both of those issues. I'd love to. I loved his book on Anthony Fauci and the corruption in that medical industrial complex. I think if Trump were to win and bring him in and make him in charge of cleaning up the medical agencies, he could do a lot of good. So that's sort of my take on it. I think it will happen. I hope it will hurt. I hope they're right. I think up until now, he was hurting Biden because I think everybody was so sick of Biden. People were going to vote for him over Biden. And if he really is taking votes from Trump, this would be a good thing, but it's hard to know. I don't know. What are your thoughts on him?
Yeah, I agree with your assessment of the man because I think he's similar to these libertarians we've seen recently, like Javier Milei, and I
Mm,
think in that respect, it'd make him a very good candidate for Trump to put in one of these big agencies just to shut it down, really. And I think that would be a good spot for RFK. What I'm really interested in looking at is looking at the electoral results, how this will affect the election itself. And I
mm,
am slightly worried that if Kennedy is genuinely supporting Donald Trump, if this will end up benefiting Trump or not. And I'll give
mm,
two options I see for how this is going to unfold. But first, just some broad statistics. If we look in, for example, Pennsylvania, and you look at how Kennedy voters are polled, you can't trust the polls to a large extent, but you have to see if there's major trends. The polls simply can't be wrong at a certain level. And if we look at Kennedy voters, they will say if they couldn't vote for Kennedy and they were just given Harris and Trump, 41% were definite about supporting Kamala over Trump.
mm,
Only 28% felt the same way about voting for Trump over Kamala.
mm,
And so that's a pretty big swing of that. Let's say Kennedy got 5, 6, 7 tops. He could get even 9, 10% of the vote in Pennsylvania, even though that would be quite a large vote share. Then you're still dealing with a lot of people that go to Kamala because Kennedy is dropped out rather than going to Kennedy himself, which is basically those voters didn't turn out.
Yeah.
So I'm worried about it in that sense. However, I think Kennedy can bring a lot to the table by doing promotions for Trump, by going on the campaign trail. We don't look if Kennedy went to some of these major podcasters or tried to motivate some voters that don't usually vote, but perhaps they're interested in
Hmm.
some of the things Kennedy is saying, and they're interested in how Kennedy presents himself. He definitely is in that sort of skeptic sphere of things, just being
Yeah.
skeptical of the world. And I think Kennedy could bring over some of those voters. So it depends on how Kennedy plays this. But at the moment, I'm a bit worried for how those voters are going to turn out now that Kennedy isn't in the race and they have just the free ability to go vote for Kamala instead of Trump.
Yeah, I think it was clear when it was Sleepy Joe, there were people who were just knew they couldn't vote for him. But the image the DNC is pushing is, the new and improved Kamala, and she's not Joe. So it's the best thing that happened in 60 days is people remember how bad this woman was. The woman that couldn't even survive to the Iowa caucuses in 2020, that didn't get a single delegate. That essentially was so bad in the debate. She was their golden child. She started the first debate in the center. She got pushed off to the side because she was so bad that they're hoping people will forget about that Kamala and just see the fake image. So we'll see, and I think you're right. I think polls really are dangerous because on the national level, because of the Electoral College, they don't tell you very much. What's more important is if you're talking about Pennsylvania, something like that in
Yeah.
Pennsylvania means a lot more than if nationally they say it won't really pull much from either side. And a lot of these polls are national. They're not done in the districts that are going to decide this election.
Yeah, exactly.